This is the revision video for life in Norman England. So we're still in section B of paper 2, which is to do with the Norman conquest, but now we're looking at what actually changes once William the Conqueror conquers the King of England. And so the first thing I'm going to do is to put change there, because most of the things in Norman England change to some degree but not to others, because England is a well established country, so the Normans don't need to change everything just because they've taken over. Well, we're going to start today by looking at the feudal system, because this is the basic means by which the king controls England. It was true for the Anglo-Saxons and for Edward, and it's true also for William the Conqueror. So what does the feudal system look like? Well, the basic way to remember it is a pyramid like that. Who's at the top? Obviously, that's the king. The next rung, well, they are the barons. Now, under the Anglo-Saxon system, they were called earls, but the Normans refer to them as barons. You've got the knights. And then lastly, you've got the peasants. But I'm going to sort of just do a dotted line here, because there's sort of two different classes of peasants. You've got the freemen, which is a smaller number of the peasants, and then most of the peasants effectively are these people called villeins, but it's Villeins, who are not free. They cannot leave their manor, their village, without asking their lord for permission. Their lord will be a knight. So how does this structure work then? Well, essentially, the king controls all the land, but he shares some of it out. He gives some of it to his barons, who control large areas all around the country. The barons then share out that bit of land they've been given to the knights, so they might control one manor, one small sort of village area. And then in turn, the knights allow the peasants to use that land for farming. Okay, so what do the people at the bottom give in return for this land that's coming down the system? Well, the freemen and the villeins, they provide essentially work and food to their knight, to their lord of their area. The knight promises to serve in a military capacity for the barons. He goes in his army, and then the barons, by having several knights who will all serve in the military and will also collect some of their peasants for the feared army if necessary, also can offer military service to the king. If you want to sort of bring those things together, what they all give to the king is loyalty. The king knows that he can call upon the barons or the knights to put together an army for him if he needs it, because he's been generous and he's shared out his land. Now, just before we move on then from the feudal system, it's worth remembering we need to look at this idea up here, change. What do the Normans change about the feudal system? Well, the first thing is to do with barons. There used to be 6 earls in the Anglo-Saxon system, but they've gone. There are now 200 barons. I'll just separate that off. There are now 200 barons, which means no one baron can be too powerful and challenge William. Now, obviously, he also gets the benefit of having 200 barons that he can send all over the country to look after England for him, because he can't do it all on his own. And as we know, he builds a lot of castles, so each baron would have had at least a castle in order to control their area, but no one baron can become too powerful. Okay, the second change they make concerns the knights. Under the Anglo-Saxon system, the knights would have given military service whenever it was needed. Under the new Norman system, the knights have to do 40 days every year military service, which means that any king of England who needs to put down a rebellion or defend his country has always got an army ready to go. So now we come to the legal system under the Normans. What did the Normans change about the laws of the country? Well, first of all, let's just remember that some things stayed the same. The basic structure of the law stayed the same. So, for example, each shire or area had a capital town that would run that area, okay? And in those shires, each one had a sheriff who would collect the tax and make the payment to the king. So he collects taxes. So as you can see, the basic structure of there's an area, has a capital town, has a sheriff who collects the taxes, sends them to the king, does not change. What also doesn't really change is the actual courts of law where decisions are made. Essentially, if you've got a very serious case, that can go to the King's Court. But then for less serious cases, you'd have the Shire Courts for the Shire area, all the way down to the Manor Court, which would be where small disputes within almost like an individual village would be resolved. There are, however, some changes to the legal system in England under the Normans, and the first one of these I'm going to talk to you about is the murderum. The murderum fine. Okay, that's a key change that the Normans make. This means that if a Norman is murdered, then the whole village, the whole community would be fined an amount of money. That helped the Normans to protect themselves because they knew they were foreign invaders and they were scared that they might be attacked. Okay. Similarly, there was also something called tithing, which tied together 12 men who all agreed that if anyone in their group committed a crime, they would name the person who had done it. This meant that the Normans had two ways to try and prevent crimes, especially crimes against them, by the local English. What else changes? Right, okay, well, the forest laws change. So there is no hunting by peasants in English forests. William loved hunting, and he got rid of the law that existed in the past where peasants could hunt for food to supplement their diet in the forest. So he gets rid of that. Probably more interestingly, what does he change? He brings in trials of different types. So people who were being suspected of a crime, to put them on trial, there was often not very much good evidence. So they could make you swear an oath and see if you would lie under oath having sworn on the Bible. However, again, perhaps more interestingly, there were trial by water, whereby they would think that innocent people would sink in water that are being blessed. So if you sank, you're innocent, but you're possibly dead. If you float, you're guilty, and so they'll probably kill you. It's unlucky, isn't it, really, either way. They had trial by iron, where they would make you hold a hot iron and see if the wound had healed after 3 days, and if it had, then you would be innocent. And then lastly, trial by battle, and that one's fairly obvious. Two men could fight, and it was thought that God would choose the winner. But the trial by battle, it should be remembered, was for noble men only, so only knights or barons, no peasants, could do trial by battle. Okay, what else changed in terms of the Norman legal system? Well, they also carried out the Doomsday Survey to make the Doomsday Book, and that was in 1085. William sent surveyors to every village and every town in England. He didn't quite get them all, but he tried to, so he could see who owned what, and most importantly, how much tax he should be taking. It made the country a lot more efficient. Now, that was against the law not to answer the questions about who owned what in your village, so that is a legal change, but it means that William can very much better control his country because he knows who's in it and he knows exactly how much tax he should be taking. So you can see these changes are all quite different because these ones help William control the country as well. These ones, the forest law really just helps him do what he likes to do and stops peasants improving their life in a way they used to be able to do. And then these trials are really just a case of bringing in Norman traditions and combining them with the existing English court system. So you get this sort of strange hybrid system where the courts are quite modern, as we'd recognise a court today. People put evidence, but then when they need to actually establish who is guilty or innocent, the court can recommend a trial by water or iron or battle, which is very much not modern. The last thing we need to know about life in Norman England is what happens to villages and what happens to towns. Essentially, villages do not change much, and that's a really important point because we're always looking to say, right, well, what did the Normans change, what did they not change? Villages did not change much. Essentially, there was still a lord. The difference is that the lord in the village would have been Anglo-Saxon, and he would be replaced by that should be an N. He would be replaced by a Norman. That's pretty much the only change that your average peasant in the village would really notice. So we need to know though, what was the system in villages, even though it didn't change very much. Well, basically there were people in the village with certain roles. Most people who were either villains or freemen, they're sort of your ordinary peasants. They would farm using the open field system. So each person in the village had a strip of land in the field. There was no fencing off or walling off of areas, and they would farm on it, and they would give some of their food to their lord to sort of repay him for giving them that land to use in the first place. But there would also be a bailiff in the village to collect taxes. There would also be a miller who would make bread using the wheat that had been grown, and there would also be a priest for the local church, because every single village would have had a church. One last thing in fact that would have changed under the Normans, so one of the only other change really, he would be for the church, and the church would probably have been rebuilt in stone as opposed to have been a wooden structure. That's something the Normans did because they really wanted to show that they valued religion. So to summarise, in terms of villages, you just need to know the different roles that existed in villages. You need to know that villains and freemen, the peasants, farmed in the open field system, but that actually the only changes really from before the Norman conquest was there would be a new lord, a new knight to be the lord of the manor, and that the church would probably have been rebuilt in most villages into a stone structure. If we move on to towns then, you'll see that there's actually quite a lot more change. Okay, more change in terms of towns. The first thing to know about towns is that they grow. There are more towns. Okay, there are 18 towns of more than 2,000 people in northern England. Okay, so that is an increase. So what would you see in a town? Well, you'd see markets or fairs where people could sell the goods. Okay, that means that you would see various different types of people in towns. So you'd see merchants. You would not see people like this in villages. Really, villages, people would just trade with each other. They grow their own food. But in towns, you would see merchants. Okay, and in fact, linking into merchants, you also saw the establishment of guilds, which were organisations to decide who could sell and work in a town. There would be trading of various goods such as wool or salt, and because of the new links that the Normans brought, some of these things would be traded to Europe, which meant that there were more coastal towns to take advantage of the trade, so people wanted ports to trade. Lastly, in towns there was a bigger gap between rich and poor. In a village, essentially everyone's pretty much equal apart from the lord. The lord is obviously above everyone else, but the priest and the bailiff and the miller and the peasants day to day would live a very similar life. It just depends what they actually do through the day. In a town, however, it's very much more obvious that there's a difference. Rich people could be master craftsmen who would learn their craft. Craftsmen will put there. They could be master craftsmen who would learn their craft. They could also be lawyers, for example, in a town. However, poor people would essentially come as peasants and work as servants to the master craftsman, who was a member of the guild perhaps, who'd done his years of training, or to the lawyers who would work in the town. So there would be a very obvious difference in Norman towns between rich and poor. So you could get, for example, an interpretation question on this, like a picture of a town where you might be able to see a poor person and a rich person judging by the clothes they're wearing, and that would in fact be convincing, wouldn't it? Because you know that there are more merchants, guilds, generally richer people and poor people in towns than in villages.